The first light of dawn always had a way of sneaking in through the blinds in my office. I never bothered with curtains. Just the thin, quiet rays of the morning sun casting long shadows across my desk, filling the space with a soft kind of energy. My fingers moved without thinking, typing lines of code as the latest updates for the payment processing system ran across the screen. It was one of those moments where everything felt right. My company had gone from a handful of scrappy developers in a tiny office to a thriving business that was shaking up the whole industry. I had something real now, a name, a purpose. If you'd told me 10 years ago I'd be sitting in this position, I would have laughed. Back then, I was just a guy at a small tech firm with a decent paycheck and a big dream that always felt a little too out of reach. I hadn't been anything special, just another coder in a sea of people trying to make a dent in the world. I worked hard, sure, but I didn't have the clarity of direction that would have really set me apart. And that's when she came along. Monica Reeves. She walked into that office like she owned the place, a consultant hired to fix whatever mess the higher-ups thought we were in. Tall, sharp, and confident, she immediately commanded attention. I remember the first conversation we had. I was sitting at my desk, head down, eyes on the screen, when she came up to me and just straight up said, "You're wasting your talent." It was blunt. Unexpected. I looked up, thinking, who the hell does this woman think she is? But I didn't say that. Instead, I just stared at her, trying to figure out if she was joking. She wasn't. "You're too good to be stuck in a place like this," she added, her voice direct. "You have potential. But you're not seeing it." That hit me like a ton of bricks. She wasn't wrong. Somewhere in her sharp eyes and the way she carried herself, I saw something I hadn't recognized in myself for a long time. She saw me, really saw me, in a way I wasn't sure anyone else had ever bothered to. Over time, Monica became my mentor. She pushed me, showed me how to think bigger, act bolder. I believed in her. I trusted her. Maybe too much. Because looking back, I can see now that she wasn't just showing me the way, she was using me. I gave her everything. Time, energy, faith. She told me what to do, and I did it. When the company hit a rough patch, she was there to guide me. When I got promoted, it was like her hand was always on my back, pushing me to the next step, and I let her because it felt good to have someone believe in me so much. But, deep down, there was always a voice. Quiet at first. But it started getting louder. Something didn't feel right. Monica didn't just want to see me succeed. She wanted to control me. It wasn't about me becoming great on my own, it was about me becoming great for her. For her to feel powerful. To feel in control. And that's when the cracks started to show. I remember the moment it all came crashing down, realizing that everything she had told me, all the advice, the mentorship, the encouragement, was just a manipulation. She wasn't helping me succeed. She was setting me up for her own gain. It was subtle at first. Small things. Over time, I began to see how she twisted situations to make herself look like the hero and me like the loyal sidekick. She played on my ambition, using it to manipulate decisions, make deals, and build her own network of power. And just like that, the woman I had admired, even trusted, became the one I could never trust again. The betrayal hit harder than I expected. Not because I didn't know deep down something was wrong, but because I had been so blind to it. I had been so damn blind. You know, sometimes it takes a punch to the gut to make you realize just how much you've been taken for granted. And for me, that punch came on a Thursday afternoon. It wasn't anything dramatic. No shouting, no confrontation. Just a little slip, a comment I overheard while walking past Monica's office. I wasn't supposed to hear it. I wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the conversation, but I was. I had just finished a call with a potential investor, walking down the hallway when I heard Monica's voice, low but clear. I didn't even know she was talking to anyone at first. She was so good at keeping her professional voice separate from whatever else she was up to. I should have known that was a red flag too, but I didn't. He's so predictable. I just feed him what he needs to hear, and he does the rest. He thinks I'm helping him. Poor guy has no idea. It was like I'd been hit by a sledgehammer. I froze in place, one foot still planted on the floor, the other hovering mid-step. She wasn't talking to anyone important, not like I thought. No, this was just a casual conversation. Probably with one of her minions or some underling she was using. But still, those words hit me like an icy slap in the face. He thinks I'm helping him. That was it, wasn't it? That was the whole thing. The truth. I had been the one doing all the work, pouring my heart into every project, every line of code, every meeting, and she had been the one pulling the strings the entire time. I wasn't her equal. I was just a pawn in her game. And worse, I had never once questioned it. I should have known better. I'd seen the way she operated in the meetings, how she always had the answers, how she always swooped in just when things started getting messy. She'd act like the problem solver, the brilliant strategist, when in reality, she was just feeding off of other people's work. My work. That night, I didn't go home right away. I stayed late in the office, staring at the screen in front of me, the numbers and codes swimming in my mind, but I couldn't focus. All I could think about was that conversation, about how I had been so damn blind. Every meeting, every decision, everything I thought was mine was really hers. She had been playing me the entire time. And that's when the plan started to form. I was no longer just going to sit back and let it happen. No, I'd been pushed too far. It wasn't just the betrayal of me as an employee or a colleague. This went deeper. It was personal. She had used me to build her empire, and now I was going to use everything I knew about her to take it all down. It started with gathering dirt. I wasn't sure where to begin at first, but then I remembered. Monica liked to talk. She liked to brag. She liked to let people know how smart and sharp she was, but she also liked to run her mouth when she thought no one was listening. And I was always listening, always watching. Over the next few weeks, I paid attention to every conversation, every deal, every transaction that came across my desk. I dug through emails, read through old contracts, and even tapped into some of her private accounts. Nothing was off limits. If there was dirt to be found, I was going to find it. And I did. I started to build a picture of who she really was. Someone who used people, manipulated situations, and made deals that were shady at best, criminal at worst. The woman I had admired was a fraud. She wasn't a brilliant businesswoman. She was a con artist with a polished exterior. And I had been the fool who bought into it. The rage that built up inside me wasn't just anger. It was a cold, calculated fire. I knew exactly what I had to do next. This was no longer about just getting even. This was about destroying everything she held dear. Her reputation, her career, her empire. I was going to burn it all to the ground, piece by piece. She thought she had control? Well, it was time to show her what real control looked like. I don't think I really realized how deep Monica's web of lies stretched until I started pulling on the threads. It wasn't just about the shady deals I could prove or the contracts I uncovered. No, the more I dug, the more I saw how expertly she had manipulated everyone around her. Not just me, but the entire company. She had built her whole career on lies and half-truths, and everyone was so caught up in her polished image that they never bothered to look closer. But I was looking now, and nothing was going to slip past me. I started digging into her past, her history before she showed up at our firm, the stuff she was so careful to keep hidden. It didn't take long before I found the first cracks. An old failed business venture she'd left in ruins. A partnership that had crumbled because she'd manipulated the other investors into taking the fall for decisions she'd made. When that didn't work, she'd just walked away, leaving everyone else to pick up the pieces. I could have stopped there, called it a day, but something in me told me to keep going. And I did. It wasn't just business failures, either. I found evidence of personal betrayals. Friends she had stabbed in the back for her own gain. Former colleagues who had been promised raises and promotions and were left stranded with nothing when she pulled the rug out from under them. She had used every person she'd ever come across, just like she'd used me. And the worst part? Most of them never even knew it. It made me sick to my stomach, honestly. I could feel the betrayal in every document I uncovered, in every story I read. But it wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice. It was about making sure that she could never do this to anyone else again. So I started to take action. I began feeding everything I found to the right people. Journalists, people who could get this mess out into the open. I didn't want her to go down quietly. No, I wanted her to burn. I wanted her reputation shredded in the public eye, her so-called genius laid bare for everyone to see. The world needed to know who Monica Reeves really was. It wasn't enough to just expose her, though. I needed to make sure she felt it. I couldn't let her wiggle out of this like she had with all her past mistakes. So, I made sure every little mistake she'd ever made, every bad deal she'd signed, was front and center. Nothing was too small to leave out. She needed to understand the weight of everything she'd done, all the people she had screwed over for her own gain. And the more I watched her unravel, the more I realized I was doing the right thing. She had worked so hard to present this perfect image of herself. A strong, savvy businesswoman who made all the right calls, but underneath, it was all a house of cards. One wrong move, and it would all come crashing down. Monica didn't notice at first. She didn't know who was behind it, who had uncovered all her skeletons and was throwing them in the world's face. But soon, it started to get harder for her to cover up the cracks. Clients who had once trusted her started to pull back. Partners she thought were loyal began to distance themselves. And then came the media. It hit her harder than I thought it would. Seeing her on the news, her face twisted in frustration, trying to explain away all the mistakes I'd made sure to put under the microscope, it was like watching a predator become prey. The woman who had spent years controlling everyone around her now found herself losing control, and I could tell it ate at her. But she wasn't done yet. She didn't just sit back and take it. No, Monica was a fighter. She started making moves to fight back, to discredit me, to try and shift the blame. She was good at that too. Too good. But I had something she didn't. The truth. And the truth was powerful. As much as she tried to push the narrative that this was just a smear campaign, it didn't matter. People could see the cracks now. They could see her lies, her manipulation, her greed. They could see what I had seen all along. Her fall from grace wasn't going to be quick or easy. And I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. It felt strange at first, watching her so publicly struggle. Part of me wanted to feel satisfaction. After all, this was what I'd worked for. But when I saw the toll it was taking on her, something inside me shifted. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about destroying someone who had used and hurt too many people to count. And I wasn't going to stop until she had nothing left. I'll be honest, I expected more of a fight from her. I mean, Monica wasn't the type to back down. She was always a step ahead of everyone, always thinking 3 moves ahead like she had a chessboard in her mind. I guess that's why I was a little surprised when she started to falter. At first, it was just a few small things. Emails that went unanswered, meetings she missed, phone calls she avoided. But as the pressure mounted, so did her mistakes. She wasn't as perfect as she liked everyone to think. The first big slip-up came when one of her top investors, someone she'd been close with for years, called her out publicly. It was one of those business dinners that was supposed to be all smiles, handshakes, and how can we make more money? But somewhere in the middle of that evening, things went south. One of her good friends, a guy who had trusted her with millions, suddenly turned on her. I don't know if she saw it coming, but I sure did. You could see the look on her face when the investor started asking questions she couldn't answer. The cracks in her carefully built facade started showing, and there was no hiding it anymore. I'd made sure of that. I wasn't there, of course. But I heard about it from a colleague who was at that dinner. The way she fumbled through her explanations, the nervous laughter that didn't quite cover up the panic in her voice. She tried to brush it off like it was no big deal, but we all knew. Her empire wasn't just built on manipulation. It was built on a whole lot of lies, too. And that's when I started to see the change in her. The cracks in her perfect persona weren't just showing, they were spreading, getting bigger with every move she made. The confident, calculating woman I had once admired was slowly being replaced by someone who was desperate to hold on to her power. The more she tried to claw her way out of the hole I dug for her, the deeper she sank. I almost felt sorry for her, for a second. Almost. But then I remembered how she'd used me, how she'd lied, how she'd taken everything I had given her and thrown it back in my face. No. I wasn't going to feel sorry for her. Not now. Soon, her whole world started collapsing. It wasn't just the investors. It was her clients, too. People she'd worked with for years started to back out, cancel contracts, or just disappear entirely. The press, once eager to talk about her innovative strategies, were now all over her like vultures. Every article that came out seemed to dig deeper, uncovering more shady deals, more corruption, more of the lies she had been feeding the world. She couldn't control it anymore. The worst part? She didn't even know where it was coming from. She thought her so-called loyal team members were the ones turning on her, but she was wrong. They were just doing what she taught them, covering their asses. When she started looking at her inner circle, she saw nothing but people who were more than happy to throw her under the bus. She turned on everyone, begging, pleading with her old friends, trying to pull them back in like a drowning person reaching for the last bit of air. It was painful to watch, honestly, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't pull the plug and let her off easy. Not after everything. I could tell she was spiraling. I had expected her to be tough, but this was different. She was unraveling fast. Her calls to me became fewer, her attempts to get back in my good graces even more pitiful. She knew I had the power to end it all, but what she didn't know was how far I was willing to go. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get worse for her, they did. I had learned everything I needed to know. I had the dirt, the leverage. It was time to deliver the final blow. But instead of acting quickly, I sat back for a moment. I watched her flail. I watched her scramble to hold on to something, anything. There was something satisfying about seeing her in full panic mode, something so justifiable. After all, she had made me feel worthless, made me feel small for so long. And I was finally in control. The next few days were a blur. I tightened the noose on her. First, I hit her where it would hurt the most. Publicly. A new round of leaks came out. More of her dirty little secrets hit the headlines. But this time, it wasn't just business. I knew her personal life was the key. Monica liked to keep things professional, but she had a history of personal indiscretions. Affairs, secret deals with shady people. Stuff that, if the right people found out, would bury her. I was ready to make sure that happened. As her empire continued to crumble, I stood back and watched. It wasn't just business anymore. This was personal. It's funny how quickly a person can go from feeling on top of the world to feeling like nothing at all. Monica was the type of person who believed she could control everything. And for a long time she did. She controlled people, situations, the narrative. But now, every time I looked at her, it was like watching someone try to hold water in their hands. The harder she squeezed, the faster it slipped through her fingers. At first, she tried to fight back. She'd show up in my office unannounced, trying to keep things friendly, acting like nothing had changed, like we were still partners in some twisted way. But I wasn't buying it anymore. She'd sit across from me, her sharp eyes locked on mine, trying to convince me that we could still work together, that we could find a way to fix everything. It was pathetic. One day, she came in, all smiles, trying to lay it on thick, like she was just a little behind on things, but everything was still salvageable. "Daniel, listen, I know things have gotten messy," she said, her tone smooth, almost rehearsed. "But we're both smart people. We can work through this. I can fix this. We can fix this. All you have to do is trust me." I couldn't help but laugh. It wasn't a real laugh, more of a bitter exhale. It didn't feel like I had control of my own life until I saw her like this, desperate and floundering, trying to salvage something that was already dead. "You're still trying to manipulate me," I said, my voice colder than I wanted it to be. "You're still playing the same game, Monica, and it's not going to work. Not anymore." She didn't say anything at first, just sat there, eyes darting around, no longer sure of herself. It was like seeing a predator backed into a corner, trying to figure out what its next move would be, but knowing deep down that it had no more power. "I didn't do this to you, Daniel," she said, her voice suddenly quiet, almost pleading. "You're making a mistake. I made you who you are. You wouldn't have any of this without me. Don't you remember what we built? What we created together?" I almost felt bad for a second. I really did. But then I remembered everything she had put me through. Every lie, every betrayal, every time I had stood by her when I shouldn't have. She had used me, and it wasn't just business, it was personal. "No, Monica," I said, shaking my head. "You didn't make me. You used me to make yourself. And now I'm done." That was it. It was like a switch flipped. The woman who had once been my mentor, my partner in this whole thing, was now just a shell of the person she used to be. She tried to gather herself, but it was too late. She had already lost everything. Over the next few days, I made sure to finish what I had started. I sent out the final leaks, all the information I had carefully gathered, and with it came the final nail in her coffin. Her shady deals were out in the open now. Every affair, every dishonest transaction, every lie she had spun to get ahead. She was exposed for who she truly was. Not the brilliant businesswoman she had led everyone to believe, but a fraud with a history of backstabbing and manipulation. And then came the financial hit. I knew she had been using her company as a shield, protecting her assets, making sure her wealth stayed intact no matter what. But what she didn't know was that I'd been working on taking that from her, too. Over the years, I'd made moves of my own behind the scenes, making sure that every deal she made wasn't just a step toward her success, but a trap. I took it all from her, the companies she'd built, the investments she'd carefully cultivated, the very foundations she had laid her empire on. In one swift motion, I wiped it all out. When I saw her again, after everything had collapsed, she was a different person. There was no more sharp confidence in her eyes. No more commanding presence. She looked defeated. "Why, Daniel?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I thought we had something. I thought you'd understand." I looked at her, not with anger, but with a strange sense of finality. "You never understood me, Monica. You only understood how to use me." She couldn't respond. There was nothing left for her to say. The woman I had once trusted, admired, and even loved in some strange way, was now nothing but a memory, and her fall from grace was complete. But here's the thing about revenge. It doesn't feel like you think it will. When you're in the thick of it, you imagine the victory will taste sweet. You think you'll feel satisfied, like a weight has been lifted. But all I felt was a hollow emptiness. I had destroyed her, sure. But in doing that, I had destroyed a part of myself too. The person who had trusted, the person who had believed in people, even in someone like Monica, was gone. There was no joy in my success. Just a deep, unsettling emptiness that only grew with every passing day. I'd won. But winning didn't feel like victory. It felt like the end of something much bigger. And I couldn't quite shake the feeling that I had just lost a part of myself in the process. In the days that followed, I thought I'd feel relief. You know, the kind of relief you imagine when you've spent months planning something down to the last detail, putting in the work, and then finally watching it all pay off. But when the dust settled, all I was left with was a gnawing emptiness. Like I had just crossed a finish line, only to realize the race was over and there was no one left to celebrate with. I had done what I set out to do. Monica was finished. Her career was in ruins, her reputation shot to hell, and her financial empire crumbled to nothing. Yet, standing there in the aftermath of it all, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Something I couldn't put my finger on. Maybe it was the way she had looked at me when she asked why I'd done it. The hurt in her eyes, like she didn't fully grasp the depth of the betrayal she had inflicted. She had used me. She had used my ambition, my trust, my hope for something bigger, only to turn it all into her personal stepping stone. But still, there had been a part of me that wanted to believe she cared. Even just a little. Maybe that was the part one had to kill off in myself in order to move forward. It was quiet for a while. The office felt strange without Monica's constant presence. The tension that used to hang in the air, the uneasy games we played, the constant back and forth of manipulation, it was all gone. There was no more stress over whether she'd try to undercut me in some meeting or take credit for something I had done. It should have been freeing, but it wasn't. Instead, I found myself losing interest in everything I once cared about. The company, the work, the projects. I was good at what I did, sure, but it all felt hollow now. I started showing up late, missing meetings, just going through the motions. There was no fire in me anymore. No drive. The people I worked with noticed. Some of them, who had been with me since the beginning, started asking questions. They'd pull me aside and ask if everything was okay, if I was all right. I'd give them the usual, yeah, just tired. Busy, but it wasn't that. It wasn't just burnout from the stress. It was something deeper. A part of me had been chipped away in all this, and I didn't know how to get it back. And then there was Ellie. Ellie wasn't part of my world before all of this. She wasn't in the business or even remotely involved with anything related to my company. I met her at a bar, a few months after everything had gone down. I wasn't looking for anything, honestly. I wasn't even really looking for company. But Ellie was different. She wasn't intimidated by me, or by the stories that had started to float around about Monica's fall from grace. In fact, she didn't even care about any of it. She was just herself. And that was what made her stand out. She didn't ask about work, about my past, or anything that might have led to the mess I was in. She just wanted to talk about life. About music, about movies, about travel. Simple stuff. Things that didn't feel like they carried the weight of the world on their shoulders. In the beginning, I didn't know what to make of it. I was so caught up in the aftermath of everything that had happened, but every time we met up, I found myself opening up to her in ways I hadn't with anyone in years. She didn't push me, didn't try to fix me. She just listened. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something that didn't come from rage or revenge. I felt something real. Something untainted by the mess I'd just waded through. Ellie wasn't part of the world I'd created, the world Monica had once been a part of. She didn't know me as a businessman or some successful tech mogul. She knew me as Daniel. Just a guy trying to find his way again. We started spending more time together. Walking through parks, grabbing coffee, talking about random stuff. She never made me feel like I was the guy who destroyed Monica, the guy who'd come out on top. She didn't judge me. It was a relief, honestly. Because with Ellie, I wasn't trying to prove anything. I wasn't trying to outdo myself, or outsmart her, or manipulate her like I had with Monica. I could just be. But the thing is, that didn't mean the scars disappeared. They were still there, buried deeper than I cared to admit. I still caught myself thinking about the ways Monica had used me, about how I'd become this version of myself I didn't even recognize sometimes. It wasn't just about business anymore, it was about who I had become in the process. Ellie made me feel like maybe I could be more than that. She made me feel like I could be the guy I had been before all of this. A guy who believed in people, who wasn't just defined by the mistakes of the past. But the more I spent time with her, the more I realized there was a question I hadn't asked myself before. Was I ready to leave the past behind? I didn't know. I wasn't sure. Because as much as Ellie made me feel like I could start fresh, a part of me was still holding on to that darkness I had cultivated, holding on to the power, the control, the victory. I had destroyed Monica's world. But in doing that, had I destroyed a part of myself too? The lines weren't as clear as I thought they'd be. It's strange, you know? How even after you've walked away from something, it still follows you. Like a shadow that doesn't let go, no matter how far you run. I thought, after all the destruction, after everything I had done to bring Monica down, I'd be free. But instead, I felt more tangled than ever. It was like I was carrying the weight of all my decisions with me, even in the lightest moments. Ellie was a breath of fresh air. She was. She had this way of making everything seem simple, of making me feel like I wasn't constantly living in the wreckage of my own choices. I'd sit with her, talk about stupid things, like our favorite childhood cartoons or the best burger joint in town, and for a second, I'd forget the world I had come from. The world that had been filled with backstabbing, manipulation, and ambition that was so toxic, I could taste it. But no matter how much time I spent with her, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was living in two different realities. One where I was just Daniel, the guy who showed up late for dinner with Ellie, who laughed at the stupidest jokes and drank too much wine at small local restaurants. And the other, the real one, where I had torn down an empire. Where I had watched someone who had once been my mentor and ally unravel in front of me, and I had just stood there, pushing her further into the ground with every piece of dirt I dug up on her. And I couldn't stop thinking about it. It was almost like a sick addiction. A constant pull to look at the wreckage I had caused, to check in on the aftermath and see how much further it had all fallen. I'd find myself Googling Monica's name, seeing the headlines still popping up, some of them just as brutal as they were the day it all started. Monica Reeves. The rise and fall of a business mogul. Shady deals and even shadier secrets. The Monica Reeves story. The more I saw it, the worse it felt. I tried to ignore it. I tried to focus on the here and now, on Ellie, on what we had. But the problem was, I wasn't being honest with her. And I wasn't being honest with myself. I knew she could see it. There were moments, small ones, when she'd look at me, and I could tell she was thinking about something deeper than the jokes we shared or the quiet moments we spent together. Ellie was smart. Too smart to miss the way I would zone out sometimes, lost in thought, staring at the blank walls of my apartment like I was waiting for something to hit me. One evening, as we sat on my couch with half-empty wine glasses between us, she turned to me. Her expression was gentle but direct, like she could feel the weight pressing down on me. "You're not here, Daniel," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "You're somewhere else. And I get it. I do. But it's like you're carrying this thing around with you that you won't let go of. What happened with Monica? That wasn't just business. You're still holding on to it. You're still holding on to the fallout, and it's hurting you. It's hurting us." I didn't say anything at first. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that I was fine, that everything was behind me. But the truth was, she was right. And hearing her say it out loud was like someone slamming a door open on a room I had been trying to keep locked. "It's not just about Monica, Ellie," I finally said, my voice quieter than I expected. "It's about me. About who I've become in all of this. I didn't just destroy her world. I lost myself in it." She looked at me for a long moment, like she was weighing what to say next. The silence between us felt thick, almost like I could feel the weight of everything I'd done pressing in on us. "You're not the man you think you are, Daniel," she said, her voice soft but certain. "You don't have to carry this forever. But you have to decide if you want to leave it behind. If you really want to walk away from all of it." The room felt too small for that question. I didn't know how to answer. Because the truth was, I wasn't sure I could leave it behind. The revenge had consumed me. It had defined me for so long. Every move I made in the past year, every step I took, was about watching Monica fall, about making her pay for what she'd done to me. But now, with Ellie sitting there in front of me, I couldn't deny it. I had changed too. And not in a good way. "You're right," I said finally, my voice rough. "I don't know how to stop carrying it. I don't know how to let go of the part of me that did all of that. Because part of me feels like if I do, I'll lose everything I've worked for. I'll lose the only thing that feels like it's mine. All the power I gained, all the control. It feels like if I don't hold on to it, I'll just disappear." Ellie reached across the couch, her hand resting on mine. Her touch was steady, calm. "You don't have to lose yourself to keep what you've built, Daniel," she said. "But you have to decide who you want to be. The man who destroyed everything, or the man who can walk away from it and start over." I stared at her for a long time. In her eyes, I saw the kind of future I hadn't dared to believe in for a while. One that wasn't about vengeance, or regret, or the scars of the past. But it was also a future that meant I had to leave the past behind. I had to stop living in that shadow, stop letting the destruction I caused define me. And for the first time in a long time, I wondered if I could. Maybe it was time to stop fighting with the ghosts of my past and start figuring out who I wanted to be moving forward. But that was the hardest part, wasn't it? Letting go. I didn't sleep much that night. Ellie's words kept swirling around in my head like a storm I couldn't quiet. "You have to decide who you want to be," she had said. That sentence felt like a challenge. More than that, it felt like a lifeline. But it was a lifeline that required me to make a choice, and choices are never easy when you've been clinging to something for so long. I didn't know how to walk away from the past. I didn't know how to simply forget about everything I'd done to Monica, the way I'd meticulously dismantled her life piece by piece. It had been so easy to tell myself that I was justified, that I was the victim in all of it, that I was just righting the wrongs she had done to me. But now, sitting in the quiet of my apartment, I realized something that hit harder than I expected. Maybe she wasn't the only one I had hurt. I had built a whole new version of myself out of revenge and bitterness, and I didn't like that version of me anymore. That version of me was angry, hollow, and constantly looking over his shoulder, afraid that someone would figure out how far he'd gone to get what he wanted. I had destroyed Monica, sure. But in doing that, I had destroyed a part of myself too. Ellie had given me an out. She had given me the chance to start over, to leave behind the baggage that I didn't even realize I was still carrying. But in order to take it, I had to stop justifying everything I had done. I had to admit to myself that revenge wasn't freedom. It was a prison. I picked up my phone and started typing. It was like an instinct I couldn't stop. I had to do this, no matter how much it hurt. I sent a message to my assistant, telling her to cancel any remaining meetings with Monica's contacts. The deals I had been quietly working on, the ones that were tied to everything she had built, I told her to back out of them. And then I did something I hadn't done in months. I sat down, took a deep breath, and called my therapist. It had been a while since I'd last spoken to him. Months, actually. I'd convinced myself that I didn't need it anymore. I had everything I wanted. Success, control, power. But now I realized how much of a lie that was. I needed to deal with the fallout from everything I'd done. I needed to make peace with the person I had become. The session was hard. At first, it felt awkward, like I was trying to fit into a space I had outgrown. But after a while, something shifted. Talking about everything I had been through, about Monica, about the betrayal, and most of all, about how I had used the pain to shape myself, was like lifting a weight I didn't even realize I had been carrying. You can't change the past, Daniel, my therapist said, his voice calm but firm. You can't take back what you've done, but you can choose to stop letting it control you. You can choose to be someone different from the person who built his world on revenge. It sounded so simple, and yet, in that moment, it felt like the hardest thing in the world. I hung up the phone feeling lighter. Not free, not yet, but lighter. And for the first time in months I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could start untangling myself from all the destruction I had left behind. The next few days were a blur. I kept my distance from work, gave Ellie more of my time, and focused on finding out who I was without the anger driving me. There were moments, small moments, when I would feel that familiar itch to check in on Monica's downfall. I'd see a new headline or a post about her fall from grace, and I would get that old rush. The rush of knowing that I was the one who had made it happen. But I stopped myself every time. It wasn't mine to claim anymore. Ellie noticed the change. She'd catch me smiling more, laughing more, even when we were just walking down the street or sitting on the couch watching a bad movie. It wasn't just a facade. It was real. I felt a little bit of myself coming back, the person who had believed in more than just revenge, the person who had been driven by ambition but had forgotten what it meant to live in the moment. One evening, as we sat on the balcony of my apartment, sipping wine and watching the city lights flicker, Ellie turned to me, her face soft and hopeful. "I'm glad you're here, Daniel," she said, her voice quiet, but there was a sincerity in it that made my chest tighten. "I'm glad you're really here." And for the first time in a long time, I could honestly say I was. I wasn't just physically present. I wasn't just playing a part. I was really, truly there, with her, with the life I was building. The past wasn't gone, but I was finally learning how to leave it behind, how to stop letting it dictate my every move. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. I still had a lot of healing to do. I knew that. But for the first time in months, I felt like I had the power to choose. I could choose who I wanted to be from here on out. And maybe that was the most powerful thing of all. I wasn't the man I had been. And I wasn't the man I had become in the wake of Monica's betrayal. I was someone new. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. It wasn't a clean break. I didn't wake up one morning and magically forget the mess I'd left behind, or the things I had done. The past didn't vanish overnight, and it wasn't like I suddenly knew how to fix everything. But for the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was running from it. I wasn't trying to outrun the guilt, the rage, or the emptiness. I was facing it head-on, and that was both liberating and terrifying. But life, as it tends to do, has a way of throwing curveballs. You can try to move forward, to build something better, but there's always something, or someone, waiting to remind you of who you used to be. And that someone was Monica. I didn't expect it to come this soon. I figured after everything had unfolded, after I had watched her lose everything, her reputation, her career, her place in the business world, she'd just disappear into the background, a footnote in the story I had written. I had buried her, so I thought. But she wasn't done yet. It started with an email. A simple one, at first. Just a subject line that read, "We need to talk." I didn't open it immediately. I sat there for a while, staring at the screen, feeling that familiar tension in my chest. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to delete it and pretend I never saw it. But the other part, the part that had been consumed by her for so long, couldn't resist. I clicked it. The message was short, clipped, but loaded with implications. "Daniel, I know you've been watching. I know you've been enjoying my fall. But this isn't over. It never was. I need to talk to you. I need to explain everything. There was more, but I didn't need to read it all. That was enough. It was the tone, the same one she'd used all those years ago when she'd pulled me into her world, made me think I was part of something bigger. The same tone that made me believe she was the only one who truly saw my potential. I could almost hear her voice in my head as I read those words. It was the voice of someone who refused to accept the end of her story. It was a voice that had always been manipulative, calculated, a voice that told me I was nothing without her. But now, it just sounded hollow. I sat back in my chair, trying to let the words sink in. I thought about everything that had happened. The lies, the betrayals, the revenge. I thought about how far I'd come since I decided to leave her behind. But the truth was, her shadow still loomed over me. I had spent so much time trying to destroy her, and in the process, I had built this version of myself that couldn't let go. Ellie noticed something was off when I didn't answer her text right away. She'd been patient with me, understanding when I went quiet or when I seemed distant, but this felt different. "Everything okay?" she asked, looking at me with those soft eyes that always seemed to cut through my defenses. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I didn't know what to say. How do you explain to someone who's been your anchor that the past you've been trying to bury is clawing its way back into your life? "Monica," I said simply, feeling the weight of the name hit me like a ton of bricks. She reached out. Ellie didn't say anything at first, but I could see the wheels turning in her mind. I could see the worry in her eyes, the understanding that, no matter how much I had changed, no matter how much I had moved forward, Monica still had a grip on me. "Are you going to see her?" Ellie asked, her voice cautious, not accusing but laced with concern. I paused, feeling the weight of the question. I wanted to say no. I wanted to say that I had moved on, that I was done with that chapter. But I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure if I could close that door for good. "I don't know," I said, my voice quieter than I expected. "Part of me wants to put it all behind me, but another part of me, I don't know, Ellie. I feel like there's something left unresolved." She nodded, her hand reaching for mine. "You don't owe her anything, Daniel. You don't have to go back to that. You've already walked away from it." I could see she was trying to help, trying to pull me back from the edge. And maybe she was right. I didn't owe Monica anything. I didn't need her approval or her explanation. But then, something else clicked in me. The real reason I wanted to go. It wasn't for closure. It wasn't to make amends or to get answers. It was about proving something to myself. It was about proving that I could let it go once and for all. I had spent so much time making her the villain, but the truth was, I had let her control me for far too long. Even in the aftermath, she still had a hold on me. The need to have the last word, to have some sort of victory over her. It wasn't about justice anymore. It was about my own pride. And that was something I needed to confront. So, I decided to go. Not to make her pay. Not to give her a chance to talk me back into her web. But to finally take that last step. To show myself that I wasn't the man I had been. That this time, I was walking away, for good. I drove to the meeting place that day with a sense of finality I hadn't felt in a long time. The city was quieter than usual, almost as if the world around me knew that something important was about to happen. I wasn't nervous, but I wasn't calm either. There was a knot in my stomach, a reminder that this wasn't just another business meeting or casual conversation. This was the last chapter. The one that would either tie up everything neatly, or rip open all the wounds I had worked so hard to heal. The place was a small cafe on the edge of town. Quiet. Secluded. It seemed fitting. Monica always did like places like this. Quiet but with a sense of importance, like everything that happened there mattered more than it really did. I sat at the table she had chosen. I didn't look around. I didn't need to. I knew she'd walk in, that I'd see her the moment she crossed the threshold. I'd always noticed her presence before, even when she wasn't saying anything. She had a way of commanding attention without trying. And sure enough, she appeared a few minutes later, gliding in like she owned the place. Her posture was stiff, her eyes sharp, but there was something different now. She didn't have the same power, the same confidence she once exuded. There was an exhaustion behind her gaze, something almost human, vulnerable, if only for a second. Daniel, she said, her voice low. She didn't sit down immediately. She just stood there, like she was waiting for me to say something first. I didn't know what to say, to be honest. I had rehearsed a dozen responses in my head, imagining this moment over and over, but none of them felt right. Monica, I said, my voice steady. You wanted to talk. I'm here. She sat down slowly, avoiding my eyes at first. For a moment, I saw the same woman I had once admired. Sharp, focused, calculating. But it was fleeting. She wasn't the same anymore. None of us were. I didn't expect you to show up, she said after a beat, looking down at her hands. But I'm glad you did. I thought maybe you'd be too far gone by now. Too far above me to even care. I almost felt sorry for her, but I stopped myself. That was the old me. The one who still saw her as someone I needed approval from, someone I owed something to. I wasn't that guy anymore. Monica, I started, my voice calm but firm, I'm not here for closure. I'm not here to apologize. And I'm not here to fix anything between us. I'm here because I need to finally walk away from this. I need to close the door on everything we built, and everything we destroyed. Her eyes met mine then, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw a flicker of something genuine, regret, maybe. But it passed as quickly as it came. Is that what you really want, Daniel? She asked, her voice soft but laced with something else. To just walk away? After everything? After everything we did together? You think you can just forget all of that? I shook my head. I'm not forgetting anything. But I'm choosing not to carry it with me anymore. I'm choosing to move forward. Monica looked at me, her lips tight, as though she was holding back something she wanted to say but couldn't find the words for. She opened her mouth once, then closed it again, like she was wrestling with herself. You're right, she said after a moment. I thought I could control everything. I thought I could use people, manipulate situations to get what I wanted. And I was good at it. But I was also wrong. I was wrong about you. I was wrong about us. I wanted to say something back, maybe something about how I had known all along, how I had figured it out and let her fall. But instead, I just nodded. We're both wrong, I said, my voice low but resolute. But it's over now. And that's the only thing I can change. She sat back in her chair, looking down at the table, as if the weight of the last few years finally hit her all at once. The Monica I knew, the woman who had always been in control, who had always had a plan, was gone. In her place was someone who was finally, just for a moment, human. Vulnerable. I stood up then, ready to leave. Ready to close the door behind me once and for all. Goodbye, Monica, I said, my voice steady, but not unkind. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for. But I'm done. I'm walking away from this. From you. From everything we were. I turned to leave, but then I stopped, halfway to the door. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. But I knew that if I didn't say this one last thing, I might regret it. I'm not that person anymore, I said, my voice quieter now, but sure. And I'm not going back. And with that, I left. As I walked out into the crisp air of the evening, something inside me shifted. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know what the next step would look like. But for the first time in a long time, I felt free. The past was behind me. The destruction, the revenge. It didn't own me anymore. It was time to start over. And this time it was on my terms.